All right, it's 12:30, so we will go ahead and get started. My name is Sarah Sims, and I'm the Assistant Director of Professional Development for the Brown School here at Washington University in St. Louis. Thank you so much for joining us for today's open classroom program. If this is your first time, Open Classroom is the Brown School's virtual and free professional development series. Beyond Open Classroom, though, we are the largest provider of social work continuing education units in Missouri and really our region. So if you're looking for CEs or you just are looking for some deeper learning opportunities, I invite you to check out our website. The QR code on the screen will take you there, as well as the link that I just posted in the chat. And we offer programs year-round on nearly a weekly basis, and we would love to have you join us. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started with our presentation today. So first, as you hopefully can already see, the chat is open, and so we welcome you to say hello and where you're zooming in from. We also welcome your comments and your questions for the presenter. We will relay questions at the end, but also feel free to put them in at any time and I'll keep track of them. But it is a Zoom webinar, so you can't come off mic or on camera. Please do use the chat. We're not using the Q&A or raise hand function, just the chat for your questions. And then last housekeeping item is that our open classroom programs are recorded and shared on our website as well as our YouTube channel. The website is there. I also dropped that website in the chat, which I'll drop again for anybody who just recently joined. There's that. All right, so that's all I have for our for our housekeeping items. So now I want to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today, who is a great collaborator of mine, Dr. Megan Keys. She is a licensed clinical psychologist with over 25 years experience delivering clinical services to trauma survivors. She served as an expert consultant with the National Center for PTSD for 16 years. As adjunct faculty here at the Brown School, she teaches graduate level coursework and is also a really great collaborator of mine in professional development, putting on many different workshops for us, which I'll share a few of those at the end. Dr. Keys is the founder of Trauma Empowered Consulting, which provides education and public speaking on trauma and mental health related topics. So we're very lucky to have her here today to present Steady Minds in Shifting Times, Mental Wellness in a Changing Political Landscape. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Keys.
Right. Well, thank you, Sarah. I appreciate it. Let me just pull up our slides so we're ready to go. Okay. All right, I think we're set now.
Oh, Megan, I think you accidentally muted yourself as you were sharing your slides.
Okay, we're back on track. All right, good afternoon. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Open Classroom. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's really wonderful to see so many people interested in this topic, and I certainly hope that the information I share today will be resonant for you and helpful. To all of our faculty and students, welcome back to our new semester. So this is a new year, and we are just going to jump right in with discussing U.S. politics, the impact they are having on our mental health, and what we can do about it. So, all right, so this is our agenda, and this just gives you kind of a general sense of the content we'll be covering over the next 45 minutes to an hour. The first portion is really just going to be sharing kind of what we know at this point in time with regards to the mental health impact our political landscape has had on our nation. The bulk of today really will be focused on the second portion of that content, where we're looking at different ways and strategies for enhancing your mental health and well-being, and that will include practical suggestions for how you can incorporate some of these things into your daily life. All right, so moving into our introduction, these are just a few standard disclaimers. I think the ones that I just want to emphasize the most are please be aware today's webinar is really just to increase your awareness about the mental health impact of politics within our nation and increase your awareness of how to use some various strategies to enhance your own mental health and well-being. This certainly does not substitute for clinical care should it be warranted. And finally, please always be aware that all opinions expressed are my own and not affiliated with any particular organization or university. All right, this is just a recap of some of what Sarah announced at the beginning in case you missed it. This webinar is recorded and a transcribed copy will be posted on our YouTube site. So you're welcome to take notes, but those materials will be up there for you within the next day or so. I'll also be providing you a full reference list. So every source that I'm citing here on today, we have a linked, a reference list with that link so you can access the source yourself if you're interested or want to learn more. And probably the biggest thing, please feel free to engage in that chat function. I'm not going to be able to view it or participate while I'm presenting, but I definitely want you to be able to engage with each other. Part of this program is enhancing a real sense of community and a learning community. So I want everybody to be able to engage and interact with each other and learn from each other even while I'm presenting in the background. All right, so what I want us to start out with is I just want to pose kind of a basic question for everybody. And I'd like you to begin with just taking a moment to pause and think about how US politics, especially of late, have really been impacting your mental health or your stress level. I'd say probably consider roughly about how you've been doing over the past 2 weeks. That's kind of a good interval leading up to this inauguration. My goal with just having you pause for a moment to think about this is just one, to help kind of increase awareness around how the US political scene has been impacting you. I think sometimes when we get into these situations where there's a lot of extensive media coverage, a lot of high and kind of intense emotions, a lot of times everything just starts feeling distressing. And it can be really helpful to try to pause and kind of parse that apart to get a better idea of where your stress level actually is. For anybody who is willing or wants to, you are more than welcome to dump your response into the chat box so that others can see how everyone else is doing. That was part of my second goal with this, was I really want people to be able to see that wherever you respond on this particular item, you aren't alone. This is an issue that really is impacting our nation. I'm going to share some data with you about that. But part of my goal is to really try to normalize and validate the reactions that a lot of people may have as we're going through this kind of changes and shifts within our political system. Okay, and just for the sake of disclosure, I will tell you my response to this question is I would say I have been hanging pretty solidly between a 2 and a 3, though I anticipate as we progress closer to inauguration and next week with the inauguration, I will probably be solidly living in number 3 and really implementing various efforts to try to kind of manage my stress around the situation. So that's kind of where I am with it. All right, so we have a big change coming up ahead of us with regards to our political transition of power. Regarding the potential sources of distress that you may be having during this time, it's really helpful to understand the nature of transitions, not necessarily the type of transition, but just the nature of transitions and how people typically respond to this. So transitions naturally embody change. Change naturally embodies some degree of uncertainty. Uncertainty typically results in stress. So even when the change is expected and wanted, you just received the great promotion, you're getting married, you're headed off on a fabulous vacation. The process of change often elicits some stress for the individual going through that transition. So please keep that in mind in general as we talk about how mental health has been impacted over the course of kind of these past few weeks and going forward. Another thing to think about when you are trying to discern for yourself or your clients how you're being impacted by our political landscape is really considering the state of our mental health kind of before entering this situation or before entering this transitional stage. So what I want to do is actually have us take several steps back and chat a bit about the mental health of our nation with regards to how just the election stress was impacting us even prior to our election results. So that's what our next several slides are going to focus on. All right. So a lot of national surveys have indicated that U.S. individuals and adults have been feeling increasingly stressed over politics over the past few years, with close to about 50% of adults identifying our political issues, our political climate as a significant source of stress in their life. Some of the more commonly cited changes or symptoms or problems as a result of this type of stress have included sleep difficulties, shortened tempers, increased emotional reactivity, so just being a little bit on edge, a little more snappish, maybe finding yourself more emotional about things than you typically are. And some individuals also reporting really starting to experience frequent and obsessive thoughts about a range of political issues. So those are some of our more common types of problems and symptoms that have been reported, in addition to just our kind of general feelings of, stress, anxiety, and in some cases, depression. So we do see that it is making a mental health impact. So this is just to kind of take a snapshot of how our nation has been reacting to this. This is just a set of headlines that I pulled from mainstream media. These started in about this past June up through the end of October. So I just wanted to capture kind of what we're being exposed to and how the nation and the media are responding to our current political landscape prior to our election in early November. So just to kind of give you a sense of that, and as you can see, I mean, just glancing at the screen, you're already seeing words like anxiety kind of jumping out at you. So I think, it's fair to say we know that this certainly has been impacting people. What I want to share with you specifically, because I always would much rather share kind of real data with you as we're talking about this, I do want to share some data about this particular survey. So for folks who tuned in during the pandemic, I cited this survey very often during the pandemic, and we're definitely utilizing it again now. So the Harris Poll conducts an annual survey on behalf of the American Psychological Association. And this survey really examines the sources of and impact of stress on individuals across the United States. So our 2024 survey was conducted in August, and the results were published online in October. The most reported sources of stress centered on the election and political issues. So I'll be sharing some key findings from the survey on the upcoming slides. But for those of you who are interested in reading the full report or seeing the methodology and the outcome data, all of that is available to you on this link. It's an incredibly user-friendly website, and it really gives you a lot of access to a lot of information. So feel free to check that out if this is something you'd like to learn more about. All right, so just to kind of give things a context, what this looks at is essentially the kind of levels of election stress over our last 3 elections. So for this past year, election 2024, stress was slightly higher than 2020, but not significantly so. However, once again, election stress in 2024 was considerably higher and significantly higher than it was in 2016. So I just want folks to see this, that going into this election, at least based on this national survey, people were experiencing similar levels of election stress as they did in 2020. A lot of the election stress seemed to be driven by concerns about the potential consequences of this election, and in some cases, fairly dire consequences. So just to give you a few examples, the results indicated that approximately 70% of adults worried that election results could lead to violence. Also, more than half of the adults endorsed that they believe that the 2024 election could be the end of democracy in our nation. So as you can see with some of these concerns that were being endorsed at well over 0.5%, there were a lot of concerns about very serious consequences as a result of our 2024 election. So this table, first of all, just kind of gives you a sense of how people were rating their stress on a scale of kind of 1 to 10. The 3 most reported sources of stress for 2024 are listed there on the slide. The future of our nation was by far the most reported source of stress, followed by our economy, and then finally the presidential election. So we can see really clearly, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the primary sources of stress really are kind of linked to our election or political issues. And so I just wanted you to kind of see that yourself to get a sense of what some of the concerns are that were really driving a lot of the stress that Americans were reporting in this survey. Now, the majority of US adults responding to this survey feel that their rights are under attack in some manner, though this is clearly experienced by some groups more than others. So if we start with the left of the graph, what we're really looking at is essentially heterosexual cisgender individuals compared to those who identify as LGBTQIA+. And although the majority of both do feel their rights are under attack, clearly our LGBTQIA+ group feels it more so. On the other side of the table, we look at kind of everybody separated by racial or ethnic groups. And again, between our white and Black US adults, they're feeling fairly similarly, no significant difference in terms of the degree to which their rights are under attack. And again, that drops some when we look at our Latino and Asian adults. But again, looking at this graph, our kind of blink response is that roughly at least 1 out of 2 people in our nation, whether it be based on gender, sexual orientation, or race and ethnicity, is feeling that their rights are coming under attack in our current political climate. So I thought this was important to include. What this table highlights is some of the issues for which Democrats, Republicans, and independents responded very similarly, in the sense that all 3 groups really were more or less having very similar concerns, kind of at the same level of frequency or intensity. So again, starting on the left side of the table, what this really is what we're highlighting. As you can see, Democrats and Republicans are running head to head on this, that, both groups definitely value the idea and believe that having different values and opinions is beneficial to society. And on that second portion of that table, what we see is that both Democrats and Republicans are equally agreeing and endorsing that being able to have conversations with people who don't share those values is important. When we flip to the right side of our screen over here, this again is just a list of some of the key issues that all 3 parties, all 3 political affiliations endorsed fairly similarly. And again, I think probably some of the biggest ones that I want to highlight is that first one, that both groups, or all 3 groups, feel fairly strongly that our country's system of checks and balances is no longer working. And I think, we can also see that the groups feel very similarly that it is stressful or concerning that the politicians are not talking about the things that are most important to them. Again, it looks like everybody has experienced some level of tension or strain in their families due to our current political climate. And again, it looks like everyone, Republicans and Democrats running neck and neck, feel quite comfortable sharing their political opinions with each other. So the reason I wanted to highlight this was certainly, I would say pretty much anything you read about politics these days or view, there's a lot of emphasis on the great political divide and a lot of divisiveness in terms of how our political system and culture has really morphed over the years, particularly over the last 2 presidential terms. But what I wanted to highlight with this is that even with the perceived divide and the divide that actually exists, there really are some commonalities under that. How much meaning that has to each person is going to be a very individual decision. But I just wanted to highlight, despite a lot of the divisiveness that we see and that we experience, when you actually look at the data in this particular survey, what we're seeing is there actually are some really core commonalities in values, concerns, and impact of stress between these political parties. So just to keep that in mind going forward. Okay, so talking a bit about how politics are kind of straining relations, particularly within families. So that's really what these two pieces of information focus on. On that table to the left, what we can see is kind of overall, roughly 1 out of 3 US adults agree that, our political climate has caused stress or difficulty between them and their family members. As we sort of break that across, gender, race, and ethnicity, and then sexual orientation and gender identity, we can see again, some groups are experiencing more distress within their families than others as a result of politics. But I think it's pretty safe to say about 1 out of 3 individuals are experiencing this relational conflict. The flip side, on the right side, it's just again some summaries of how these political issues and viewpoints are impacting people within their relationships, whether it's decreasing their desire or proclivity to actually engage and connect with other people, whether there's some level of generalization, that now we're now looking at a reasonable amount of people feel that if somebody has an opposing political view, there must not be absolutely anything in common that they could have with that person. So having a little bit more of a generalized, polarized view. And then finally, that last chunk of data, really looking at the degree to which our political climate and political issues are impacting adults who are dating, and what that's looking like in terms of really putting in place some barriers in terms of who individuals would be willing to date. So I just wanted to share that piece with you on the relational conflict and distress. I think most people are probably in touch with, to whatever degree, politics have impacted relationships in your life. But again, I wanted to highlight that you certainly are not alone. And, we're easily seeing that about 1/3 of our nation is being impacted in some way within this domain of their lives. All right, so despite all of that I shared with you, one of the really positive things that came out of this particular survey passed last August was that around 60% of the respondents endorsed that they still felt hopeful about the change that this 2024 election may bring. And I think that speaks a lot to the resilience and power of hope in our nation. That despite people very clearly being willing to endorse and report their levels of distress and how they're being negatively impacted, they're also very willing to endorse, the pieces of hope or positivity that they were trying to hang on to. So where this really leads us as a nation, I'm not exactly sure, but somehow it felt like it was important to share that and get that out there in the midst of all of the other data about kind of the negative impact that political issues are having on our country. At least we know that prior to election, the majority still were hanging on to and feeling hopeful about where things may go. Okay, so part of my real goal was sharing that data with you, not only getting real data in front of you and real numbers, but I also, again, like I said, I just really, really wanted to normalize and validate what a lot of people may have been experiencing, not just leading up to this recent election, but, I think our country's politics have morphed a lot over the last 2 terms. And, we're now going on looking from the 2016 election forward, almost a solid decade of, for many individuals, fairly significant stress related to our political landscape. So I just really want to acknowledge that. I want to make sure people understand that wherever they are on the spectrum and whoever they voted for, as we're seeing even with opposing political parties, everybody's getting impacted in some way from this political mess that we're all kind of trying to shuffle through and move forward. So just please be aware of that. I think that was important to make sure that that was conveyed. Well, hopefully it probably doesn't take too much convincing from the data that I shared with you in the headlines that, our political climate really could be considered a chronic stressor for some, if not many individuals. Once again, I always like using headlines just to kind of give everybody a snapshot of how the nation or the world is responding, in this case, to our political situation and our election. So these are all headlines that I pulled from both national and world news that highlighted people's response and nation's response to our election results. One of the things that I'd like to highlight is I did try to pull some of the the titles and some of the headlines that really emphasize some of the special populations and groups of individuals who not only historically have probably been targeted and discriminated against, but have kind of been especially targeted and a special focus of a lot of discrimination and ire during this election. The headline in the corner about the wake-up call about LGBT crisis hotlines. For those who are familiar with the Trevor Project, and it is a LGBTQ organization that really provides a lot of support for LGBTQIA youth, their crisis line calls went up 700% the day after the election of youth calling in distress about what the election results may mean for them. So also I pulled some headlines regarding how the election is impacting individuals' reactions towards women, how they're impacting their reactions towards immigrants, and then as well how even at large, scientists concerned about climate change, their reactions to the election, our global economy. So again, not that everybody isn't already aware of this, but I think sometimes it can really help to validate it and see it in black and white, the range of concerns and the concerns coming from, everybody from, these are articles from Forbes and Fortune down to, the AP News and Time Magazine. So just to give you that as a sampling of kind of how the nation and the world reacts to our election results. Okay, so like I said, I think it is fair to say that we can consider our political climate at the moment a chronic stressor, at least for some individuals. And so what I really want to do is just provide a little bit more information about chronic stress and really the impact that it can have on us. It's going to be really important to understand this in order to better understand the strategies that I'm going to be suggesting as ways to kind of mitigate the negative impact of this. So this diagram on the right-hand side of the screen really illustrates how stress affects us in the short term, what's happening to our bodies kind of in the moment that we experience stress. However, the thing that's really useful is to be able to understand how stress affects us in the moment as well as over time, since we're now talking about chronic stress and stress people have been under for a prolonged period. All right, so I'm going to kind of walk you through that diagram at the moment. So one of the many functions of our brain is to operate as a threat detection system. So just like, antivirusware or malware on a computer, our brain is constantly scanning for any signs of potential danger so that it can keep us safe. When we experience stress, our brain interprets stress as a sign of danger, and it immediately sends a signal out to our body that we need to be ready to respond. That's all of those outward arrows that you see coming from the center of that diagram that says stress hormones. All right, this sets in motion a series of physiological changes that include things like increased heart rate and blood pressure, muscle tension, shallow breathing, sweaty palms, a lot of those physical symptoms people sometimes experience when they're feeling acutely anxious or nervous. It also involves the release of a lot of stress hormones, including cortisol and adrenaline. This entire process is referred to as the stress response or the fight, flight, freeze response, which most people have probably heard of. The stress response is an automatic biological response that we do not have direct control over. It is useful to us, it's a very primitive response, and it is useful to us because it helps us react quickly when we are faced with an imminent threat, like somebody accidentally swerving in front of you on the highway. However, that stress response is activated every time we experience stress, even when no imminent threat is present. Just thinking about or talking about something stressful can often elicit our stress response at some level. Now, when we experience chronic stress, as we've kind of established, a lot of people have been experiencing as a result of our political climate, that stress response, that biological process is continually activated again and again. And that increased physiological arousal, increased heart rate, heightened blood pressure, shallow breathing, over time, that physical arousal can really negatively impact our mental and our physical health, as indicated by some of the issues kind of noted at the bottom of that slide. Therefore, learning how to reduce stress and mitigate its impact is incredibly beneficial for us in terms of our mental health physical health, and overall well-being. And that's really part of what we're going to be focused on moving into this next section. Okay. So in terms of enhancing mental health and wellness, what I am citing for you are just kind of 4 different strategies or domains of strategies that can be particularly helpful in times of chronic stress. So just kind of be aware of that. They are absolutely helpful even in times when you aren't under stress. That's part of mental wellness, is really engaging in practices that we know are going to enhance our well-being, not necessarily only engaging them when something's going wrong or when we're feeling stressed out about something. So all of these are positive strategies and skills to have on board to continue to utilize, even once some of this political stress dies down, but they can be especially helpful to you right now and going into the coming weeks and months. All right, so let's first talk about media exposure. And this is a big one, especially given the media coverage of politics and what I imagine the continued media coverage of moving into this next term is going to look like. So research has shown that during times of collective crises or turmoil, mass violence, natural disasters, excessive media exposure about the event, several hours or more per day, can increase feelings of stress. More recent research has demonstrated that social media exposure, excessive social media exposure to such events, can exacerbate anxiety even more than traditional media. So a study that I really like to highlight that I think just beautifully illustrates how powerfully media coverage can impact us is one that was conducted by Holman, Garfin, and Silver, and it was published in 2014 after the Boston Marathon bombings. And so what the results evidenced was that 6 or more daily hours of media coverage about the bombings resulted or evidenced higher acute stress ratings than direct exposure to the bombings themselves. So what that means is, for those individuals sitting in their homes or their offices watching the bombings on a screen, were reporting higher distress levels than people that were actually at the Boston Marathon and on site at the time the bombings occurred. So if that doesn't illustrate the degree to which media coverage, and especially that chronic excessive exposure of the doom scrolling and really ingesting a lot of negative news stories and distressing content for extended periods of time, it has such an impact on our mental health. So I really want to make people aware of that. Remember our stress response. Just thinking about something stressful can elicit. So sitting there for multiple hours on end, reading and viewing this type of content around an event or an issue that's highly stressful for you or highly distressing, you are kicking off that stress response again and again and again and again, and really kind of contributing to the physiological arousal and the issues that can really wear on your mental and physical health. So just please keep that in mind when we talk about media coverage. Given, again, like I said, the media coverage in the United States and of all these issues, it's really helpful to have a plan for how you're going to view it, if you choose to view it, how you're going to view it. So this is just a list of some suggestions that might be helpful. It is strongly recommended to identify 1 or 2 reliable news sources and use those as your primary source of information. Research tells us that when information is clearly conveyed from an authoritative source, people learn and benefit from it. Consider setting parameters on the frequency and the amount of time that you're actually going to do media reading or viewing. So this is going to be highly kind of individualized based on your schedule and what you know works for you, but do consider really having designated times. I'm going to view the media or read about the election coverage or political issues for 15-minute intervals 2 to 3 times a day. Start trying to contain it and kind of set some parameters around it so it doesn't have free reign. That third one, I think, is actually one of the most crucial ones. Once you are informed, stop. Research tells us that viewing numerous stories about the same issue and the same event just exacerbates our stress. So doom scrolling. that act of just spending a great deal of time online, continuously ingesting a lot of this negative news content, it's been shown to result in feelings of depression and of helplessness. So really the key here is to find a balance. Want to be able to view enough media coverage of important events to stay informed, but limit that exposure to prevent increased anxiety. The biggest thing to remember with this, especially social media, for folks who get a lot of their news from there, and I do as well, we've got to remember social media platforms are designed to hold our attention, keep us engaged, and elicit a response, namely that we stay on social media and continue clicking away. Therefore, if you get a lot of your media coverage through social media, it may require more effort and discipline to really be able to set those parameters around usage. If you are struggling with that, a few things you can think about is start reducing your access to social media. Pull the apps off your phone or off your watch. Sign out of them on your computer so you can't just automatically get right into those accounts, but have to physically sign in each time. That allows you a few more seconds to actually make that decision if you want to go ahead and continue. And honestly, in worst case scenarios, and this is what I did after the last election, our most recent election. I shut down my social media. The morning of November 6th, when I saw the results, I shut down my Facebook and Instagram for about 2 weeks because I knew, as distressed as I was going to have a very hard time being disciplined. And for me, it was better to just get it out of my hands altogether. So just some things to think about with social media and media coverage, knowing the incredibly powerful impact excessive viewing can have on you. All right, self-care. So we chat about self-care a lot. This has really kind of become part of kind of mainstream culture when we talk about self-care, and a lot of different meanings have been attributed to it. But in the most basic terms, self-care is defined as being proactive in protecting and supporting your well-being physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. So self-care is going to look very different for every person. However, research indicates that there are some core components of self-care that can be particularly helpful when experiencing significant stress or chronic stress. So I've just broken down into kind of physical self-care and mental self-care. And those first couple points really apply more to physical. Okay, everybody's heard this before, but good nutrition, adequate sleep, and exercise helps maintain physical health. It also helps protect against that negative impact of chronic stress. That continuous physiological arousal because of that stress response being activated so frequently. So for example, research tells us that regular exercise reduces the symptoms of anxiety and depression for some people and tends to promote better sleep for most. The second point, learning how to be proactive in reducing stress. So actively managing your stress levels by utilizing practices such as relaxation techniques, yoga, meditation, mindfulness. These are all very specific practices that are research-based and have been shown to reduce stress. Research tells us that they are very effective for reducing stress and anxiety, not just in the moment that you're doing the practice, but over time. Studies have shown that individuals who regularly incorporate some of these relaxation exercises or practices into their daily routine tend to report lower overall levels of stress. Lots of apps out there on mindfulness and meditation that can be utilized. Calm and Headspace are two that have a good amount of kind of scientific data behind them, and you can access that data on their websites. A new one that I've just started using this year that I really like for breathing is called Open, just OPEN. That's one that I found to be really incredibly helpful also because it really is guided breathing exercises. Moving down into kind of a bit more about our mental self-care, mental health self-care. That third point is incredibly important. Participating in hobbies and recreation supports good mental health and wellness. Research indicates that people who regularly engage in enjoyable activities report lower levels of stress and enhanced mood. So to put it in the simplest terms, as I said there, Really identify or find what brings you joy and carve out the time to be able to do that as part of your regular daily or weekly routine. Again, in the context of our political transition and in the context of chronic stress, being able to create and experience joy for yourself is something that's going to help balance a lot of that negativity. Those last two center a little bit more on mental self-care, mental health self-care. So when dealing with adversity, consider how you have successfully coped with difficult situations in the past. So many of us, not most of us, learned adaptive coping skills during the pandemic. We know how to get through chronically stressful situations that last longer than desired. Who or what was helpful to you back then? What did you rely on the most, whether it been to manage your stress, to improve your mood, to enhance social connections? Consider using that information, what you learned, those personal strengths that you gained over the course of the pandemic or other difficult, stressful periods in your lives, and think about how you can apply those to our current political climate. Last one, finding meaning. So maintaining a sense of purpose is important for mental wellness, but it is especially important for our mental health during times of uncertainty and change. So one suggestion for finding a sense of purpose kind of within our current reality, where many individuals may be feeling overwhelmed or powerless at times, is being proactive in helping yourself. Address problems and obstacles as they arise. Even if you're needing to break them down into manageable pieces, try not to avoid them or let them build up. Be kind to yourself in this sense, in terms of being proactive in helping yourself. Set realistic goals, even if they're modest ones, that are going to move you towards something that you hope to achieve in this interval. Successfully navigating challenges and executing tasks can provide a sense of accomplishment, which can be empowering when certain aspects of our lives feel out of control. So please consider that as well when we talk about self-care and doing things to protect your mental and emotional well-being. All right, so when we talk about another thing that we can chat about is promoting positive thinking. So now this is going to apply to almost any given kind of situation in our lives. It's certainly not exclusive to pandemics or changing political climates. But it is something that can be particularly helpful during highly stressful times. So our thoughts or perceptions of a given situation have a huge impact on our feelings. So given this chronic political stress many people have been under, it's understandable that you're having feelings of anxiety, sadness, anger. Those are natural emotional reactions to legitimately a very difficult situation. However, the intensity of our feelings can be exacerbated by our thoughts. If you notice at times that certain emotions are starting to feel really powerful, overwhelming, maybe even disruptive to what you're doing in that moment, that may be an indication to pause and check in on what you're thinking. We all have an inner dialogue, okay? We have this running stream of unspoken thoughts going through our head at any one point in time. These thoughts are self-talk may be helpful or unhelpful. When our self-talk gravitates towards extremes or negatives, using words like always, never, should, that really tends to be unhelpful to us because extreme thoughts tend to result in extreme emotions. And more negative thoughts we have, the more negative emotions we tend to experience. So finding a way to really identify and replace those unhelpful or negative thoughts that are running through our head and trying to replace them with something that's a little more balanced and a little more accurate can really help reduce the intensity of those negative emotions, but also maybe allow for the possibility of some positive emotion as well. So I cited two examples here that are just really common unhelpful thoughts people can have during times of change and uncertainty. I'm just going to use that first one as an example. So if what I'm telling myself is, I have no control over anything, understandably, I probably would be feeling some feelings of maybe feeling scared, feeling helpless, feeling anxious. But if I can reframe that to something that is in fact more accurate, I do have control of some things, and I can choose to try to focus on those things that I have control of. So I have control of some things and I can focus on that. Well, not only does some of that fear and helplessness start to reduce, but it also allows an opening for maybe feeling hopeful, maybe feeling a little more capable. So what we're really talking about here is just trying to make some simple tweaks and changes to some of those really extreme thoughts or statements that are running through our head. And those little tweaks can sometimes have a really big impact on our emotions and how we're feeling. Okay. Another part of promoting positive thinking is optimism. So optimism is really just basically defined as a hopeful attitude and a belief in positive outcomes. Practicing optimism really helps us improve our ability to think and feel more positively. All right, why is this especially important in our changing political environment? Because although we don't necessarily have control over many of the negative events that are happening in our country and with our political system, we do have the ability to enhance positivity in our own lives to serve as a counterbalance. Moreover, research tells us that optimism reduces stress and depression. It enhances well-being, coping abilities, and satisfaction in relationships. Research also tells us that optimism results in better health outcomes and longer lifespan. So what I'm giving you there are really some examples of simply how to increase the exposure to positivity in your life. Visual reminders are a great place to start, whether it's pictures, words, quotes, sayings, anything that you can have in your visual field that's going to be positive or spark a feeling of positivity in you, try to find a way to incorporate that into your environment. Screensaver, iPhones, case covers, mugs or cup that you always drink out of, putting things on your laptop or computer monitor, anything that's going to kind of, when you glance at that spot, you can lay your eyes on something that enhances your sense of positivity. Reading books or reading articles about resilience, about inspiring individuals. That's another way to really increase your exposure to positive thinking. Again, back to our social media, we talked about the doom scrolling. We already covered that. Having a lot of negative content in your social media, and that includes following sites or people that you may have negative reactions to. You may have sites out there or people out there that when they post, you don't always have a particular positive reaction to what they're saying or what they're posting. Think about curating your social media in terms of really finding things that can enhance your exposure to positivity. What has now been coined, and this may be one of my favorite terms that I've heard in a long time, is hope scrolling. So it is the opposite of doom scrolling. Hope scrolling is really intentionally seeking positive, inspiring, or uplifting content online. So not only is that reducing exposure to negative content, but it's increasing exposure to positive content, which can improve your overall perspective and your mood. So consider that also for folks who do spend a lot of time online or spend a lot of time in front of a computer, of considering some hope scrolling the next time you find yourself kind of going down that rabbit hole of negative media attention around our political system or any other negative events. And then finally, I just want to touch on social connections. So we've talked about this many, many times. I know everybody is aware of this. Research tells us again and again, strong social support is critical during times of stress, period. It is critical. We need to be connected to other people. When we are going through negative events, we need to be able to talk about those negative events with other people. So the bottom line is people need people. I don't think I have to beat a dead horse with this one. I'm giving you some general suggestions on kind of ways that you can think about connecting with others, being strategic in terms of connecting with the people that you sort of trust and know are going to be able to give you what you need in a given moment, the family member that's the great listener, the friend that always makes you laugh, and also really being proactive and offering and providing support for others. Because, research tells us that giving support increases positive emotions and decreases negative emotions for the giver. And it also really encourages others to be able to kind of reach out to you when they need something, and you may feel better about reaching out to them when you need something. Bottom line, people need people. We need to stay connected more than ever during chronic stressful times. All right, and then finally, the last one I want to touch on is professional assistance. And this is just, part of good mental health and wellness is recognizing when you may need help. This often results in people questioning, how do I know? So I just listed some just kind of general guidelines. So, if those symptoms, whatever changes you're noticing, if they have become really excessive and have been hanging around for a couple months or more, if they're highly distressing and it just feels like, you really can't manage them or they're causing conflict in your relationship, if whatever the changes or symptoms are impairing your functioning, they're getting in the way of you doing what you want to do or you need to do. And then finally, if there are ever safety concerns, thoughts about hurting yourself or others, frequent thoughts of death, better off dead feelings, those are all kind of red flags and indications that meeting with a mental health provider may be beneficial, at least to get a better idea of what's going on. If you are considering therapy, please be aware there are many time-limited, evidence-based treatments for really common issues like depression and anxiety and sleep, insomnia. And then finally, I just have a couple resources there that can be helpful both for finding a therapist and for having a crisis lifeline kind of tucked away if you or someone you love ever needs that. All right, so at the end of this, what I'm just asked is, given everything we've covered, if you had to pick just one of these, kind of one of these domains or one of these strategies that you think would be most helpful to you going forward, I'm just going to ask again that you take a moment to think about it and see, kind of commit to which one you'd like to start utilizing and trying. You start as early as tonight. There's no time like the present. For those who would like to dump their committed new strategy for enhancing their mental wellness. If you'd like to dump that in the chat to kind of see what folks are choosing, feel free to do that. Normally, I know I normally have a lot of resources for you guys. This time what I did was I specifically pulled articles and resources from the public domain that anybody can have access to. So we have a full reference list with all of the links that'll be on our website, I believe, Sarah. So feel free to pull whatever you want from there. A lot of these articles offer a lot of suggestions. I kind of curated a very specific selection of them for today. There's lots more information out there and suggestions for you. Here's my information if anybody needs it. I realize we're running short on time. And then we can move over to questions and discussion.
Yeah, and sorry, I was pulling that out of my email and dropping it into the chat. We will, as Megan mentioned, post the recording of this, but also the reference and resources on our website as well. But most people should also be able to download it from the chat here. So sorry, I'm just kind of I'm scrolling through the chat to make sure that I have kind of everything. So first, thank you so much, Megan, for this presentation. I think it's much needed, and we have a lot of really positive comments in the chat. And the first, and feel free, everybody, as I'm going through some of these questions, if you have more, you can drop them in the chat and we'll try to get to as many as we can. The first question, and I know that this can be hard to do on the spot, but is around data. People really appreciated the data that if you want to go to that slide, if it's helpful reference. But some of the questions were, and I know this can be a hard one to answer on the spot, but just more about the demographics of the people. And I know you probably don't have it in your slide right now, but I wonder if you could post the link to this. Someone was asking about where they can go. Again, yeah, that link right there. If you wouldn't mind putting that in the chat. Because people just had different questions about the data and, like looking at the election results themselves, like wondering, how that or how the survey respondents lined up in terms of voting or political affiliations, and just if we can glean any more information from the data, or that you maybe thought about while you were researching for this presentation but didn't have time to actually put into it.
Oh, absolutely. So just so people know, I really pulled just a small portion of the data for the sake of time. We could have done a whole webinar just going through the Stress in America survey. So there's a lot more data and a lot more information on this website. So when you go to this link, it's going to pull up kind of the main screen that will have the report there, kind of a detailed report. On the right-hand side, you're going to see additional links where you can click for the methodology, you can click for the specific survey questions, and you can click for all the outcome data. So within this, these are representative samples. They did look at many things, many other things, including, now remember, this was in October, so we didn't know the final results of if people voted, but I do know that the results showed overall, I'm sorry, I'm not able to break it. I don't know it off race and ethnicity and gender off the top of my head, but that overall it was the majority of US adults did plan to vote. The majority of US adults did endorse that they felt more committed to political issues and wanting to be involved. So those were two of kind of the really positive outcomes, along with kind of that hopeful piece that were coming out of how people were responding to the election stress leading up to the election. But yes, there's so much more data on there that is available. So please just dump that link into your browser and go to it and just read the report. But also, if you really, my numbers folks who really want to see the top line data and the methodology, that is all right there and available for you.
Cool. And then another question related to data is, and you may or may not know this, but I wonder how far back this survey or similar surveys go.
Okay,
The question is around kind of like how much of these high levels of stress are related to current candidates, current climate, versus maybe just a generational shift. Like, we've gone through a big technology shift in the past couple of decades, and how and the means through which we engage with politics. And, yeah, is it kind of just like in, these recent years, or has this been a bigger shift over the last couple of decades?
Okay, so with the Stress in America survey, and that's the reason that I really like to use this one aside from public access, I don't remember the exact year they started this because I just tuned into it during the pandemic is when I really became aware of it and started following it regularly. I want to say maybe 2016 or so, but it may have even been earlier. So APA has been running this survey for quite some time. It typically was an annual survey, and it typically did just look at what are people reporting as kind of common stresses of source in their life and how it's impacting them. All of these reports are online. You can go back and pull any of these Stress in America reports from the previous years for as long as they've been running it. So you will be able to go in and capture in a given year kind of what were people responding to. During the pandemic, they started running close to monthly, not quite monthly, but close to monthly reports. And during that interval, it also captured, it captured not just the pandemic, but it captured a lot of other social stressors we experienced, like the death of George Floyd. That was one where there was a lot of data collected around how people were responding to that. There was a lot of data collected during that interval about how people were responding to kind of social injustices. So this survey's been around for a while. To me, what I love about it is it's very timely and zeitgeist, and it kind of captures what's going on in the moment. But because they've been doing it for a while, we really do have the ability to go back and look at how things have shifted over the years. And they will give you all the demographic data also. So you always are going to be able to see, age, ethnicity, gender, and education, etc. All that's out there. Another survey that is helpful, though unfortunately they discontinued it, but you can find the old data, is called the Household Pulse Survey. And this one was it's been running for a while, but during the pandemic, they started collecting monthly data looking at people's levels of depression and anxiety. And this data was not only I think they posted the data, I want to say almost weekly or monthly. Weekly. But you could go through and you could look at data for any given cohort that you wanted to look at, or ethnicity. You could look at it for a given state, or you could look at it nationally. So if you just Google Household Pulse Survey, That's another really excellent survey that I wish they were still doing currently so we could still get those real-time measures of depression, anxiety. But you can pull a lot of data from that as well going back in time.
Thank you. Gosh, and I'm so sorry that we are out of time. Excellent questions from everybody. I do just want to close us out real fast. Megan, if you want to take down your screen, and I'm gonna share mine. Just so that everybody has the QR code. This is where we'll be posting a recording of today's program. The recording should be available tomorrow, so please check that out. And then I'd love to invite everybody, next month is February, and we do an annual Black History Month webinar series. They're free programs, and we have 5 speakers lined up for this year's Black History Month programming. I'm also going to drop a link to that in the chat where you can kind of view our full kind of everything. But I hope you sign up for those. And then last but not least, Megan, our presenter today, has 3 workshops coming up this spring and summer. They're a little bit longer than this. The first is on veteran suicide prevention and lethal means safety in April. Then she's doing one on PTSD treatment on April 11th. And then this summer, she's doing a 2-day intensive on cognitive processing therapy. So you all are invited to check those out. I put the link in the chat. And then I saw a question. There again is the QR code to go to our website where today's recording will be posted when it's ready tomorrow. So again, thank you so much, everybody, for joining for our first open classroom of the 2025 year. And thank you so much, Megan, for being our presenter today and sharing your knowledge and your passion for mental health.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone. You have my contact information. Please feel free to reach out if I can ever be of assistance. So thank you again, and hopefully we'll see you again in the future.